All right, we now welcome on to the channel a very special guest. It is Arif Hasan from The Athletic, and he also writes for the Vikings. I myself am a Vikings fan. And Arif, it's looking more and more like Derek Stingley as the days go on. We're recording this Tuesday night. It's looking like he won't be there at 12. And there's a good chance we take a Trent McDuffie and from the University of Washington. Are you okay with that? And what's your overall thought process with our selection at 12?
Yeah, I guess okay is maybe the right word. I wouldn't necessarily be overjoyed, but neither would I think that it would be a bad pick for the Vikings. He has been kind of ranked, I wouldn't say all over the place, but he's been kind of ranked anywhere between eighth overall and 25th overall or so. So there's been a pretty wide range of rankings for McDuffie. And so there's a lot of people where if you take a look at kind of what they think about the guy, they think it'd be pretty justified taking him at 12. Some would even think it's a steal. I know that like Dan Brugler, for example, my colleague at The Athletic, has McDuffie ranked above Stingley. So I mean, that's entirely possible that that would be a smart or a good pick. One thing that like stands out to Brugler is that, he thinks that McDuffie might be the smartest player in the draft, right? And like that's not a bad thing to add to your team. So yeah, I mean, personally, I don't know that it would rock my socks off or anything like that, but I think it's a justifiable pick. Certainly, if somebody fell, that's just a much more exciting scenario that I get to write about. Like if a Kyle Hamilton fell, if somehow Ahmad Gardner fell, like one of those scenarios where I'm just, yeah, people are going to read. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's actually a question I was going to ask you later, but since you brought it up, we'll just go ahead and ask it now. Or is there any player that, I mean, as a writer, there's obviously, I mean, it's a job. There's there's good parts of a job, there's bad parts of a job. Is there any prospect? I mean, this can be, pie in the sky. Is there any prospect where you're just like, man, like it'd be cool. Like I couldn't wait to write about him.
Malik Willis.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
I mean, first of all, if the Vikings draft a quarterback, that's
Yeah. Oh
instant
yeah.
clicks, right? Like
Totally.
I absolutely, I've got a content machine, right? So I don't have to worry about that. But also, like Malik Willis is just a fun guy to kind of watch and cover. Like he can be frustrating because there's like some pretty easy reads he should be
For
making
sure.
and he's missing and all that. And personally, I don't actually see a first round quarterback out of him. Maybe that's just me, but
Right.
the upside is tremendous. It's tantalizing. It's something that, as a writer, you love talking about and thinking about. And, you get to cover the highlights in camp and people have to kind of experience what you're watching through what you write, as opposed to, a game. Everybody just gets to watch the game. And so that gives me an opportunity to really, talk about some of the more exciting things that can happen at a camp, which, it's a young quarterback that a lot of people believe in. Right. So that would be, I think, the most exciting from a writer's perspective. It would also just be kind of just intriguing in general. Like, are the Vikings willing to wait 2 years, with him on the bench, because that's what Cousins' contract is, that sort of thing. So that would be exciting. The player that might be really fun to watch that's not a quarterback might be Jordan Davis. It's
Oh
probably
yeah.
not
I
like
love
a
him.
wise decision for the Vikings from a positional value perspective, but like he's just good. I like him. He's just
I
fun to
love him.
watch.
He's so
Yeah.
fun. If we took Malik though at 12, if he's there, you don't think Vikings Twitter? Do you think they'd overreact? Every
Oh,
you don't
I
think they'd
can't
overreact?
imagine. Vikings Twitter, no. No, they would take it
Absolutely
very,
not.
very calm and collected, take it in stride for sure.
So not to say every draft isn't a big draft because they all are, but there were times, especially in the first round, in the past couple years, where Rick was the GM, where last year was a perfect example. We're on the clock at 14. It's looking like Vera Tucker's going to be the selection. We go ahead and trade back to 24, and we were mock Darisaw a good amount. And after the Raiders took Leatherwood at 17, and we were back up at 24, I mean, I was 99.9% sure. I was like, whenever Goodell announces this, it's going to be Christian Darrisaw. But with there being a lot of talk around our new GM with Quezzy, with the analytics background and everything, is there anyone you think the Vikings potentially ruled out or just they're significantly lower on their draft board than other teams are?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, it wouldn't shock me if, for example, they might be a little bit down on, say, Traylon Burks, right?
Oh, for
Just
sure. Yeah, yeah.
because the 40 time doesn't really match, and that's something that they'd want to pay attention to in terms of the way that they kind of run those numbers and try to project performance forward. It's not quite the same as somebody like a Kyle Hamilton, where you've got all this other data that says, maybe that 40 time doesn't matter as much. And also our scouts just think the world of him. Whereas Treylon Burks, he's in a tier with a bunch of other receivers. And so he's going to lose a bunch of tiebreakers as a result. So it could be, that could be maybe a good example of that. If they might not want to trade back up into the first for something like that, if they were really committed to a receiver. Sounded like, based on what Kwesi said today, maybe they're not all that set on the idea of getting a receiver. But I think that might be a good example. I think Kenyon Green, really tremendous talent, really good player, might not be a system fit for the Vikings just because of the athletic requirements needed for an offensive lineman in the system. So I wouldn't be shocked if they were a little bit further down on him than others. And when you say you're down on a player, if he's available in the third round,
Right.
you'd grab him, right? So it's not like that he's off the board or
Right,
anything
for
like that.
sure.
But it's certainly, if you downgrade a player, another team is going to value that player more, and he's almost certainly going to be off the board, and you won't have an opportunity to take him. So it's very similar to that. But I think those two players are maybe pretty good examples of that. If positional value matters a lot, then maybe we won't see somebody like a Zion Johnson, enter the conversation for the Vikings. Again, we're talking about, if the Vikings trade down or something like that, right? Like I would already doubt that Zion Johnson would be the pick at 12. But I think that because of positional value, I think that they might value a guard in the first round a little bit less than a lot of other teams. So that's probably my intuition, again, without, at least a little bit of a history to work with Kwesi. It's all pretty much supposition.
So, Arif, recently, about a month ago now at this point, you were on another podcast that I listened to, the Stock Exchange with Connor and Trevor, and he's getting married, by the way. And and you were the guest picker with Tyler Linderbaum at 12, and prefaced it with it's a possible trade out situation because the board it didn't break well for you there. But my question here for you is, with Linderbaum, with the lower weight and, a current center that we spent a first round pick on in 2019 and Garrett Bradbury, and he struggled at times in the NFL. His size isn't too far off from Linderbaum's. Are you concerned at all with Tyler projecting at the next level, based on Bradbury, who we've seen has had woeful times?
Yeah, I don't think any more concerned. I mean, it's going to be a concern. It is a concern of mine, but I'm not any more concerned because Bradbury didn't pan out for the Vikings, right? I think it's too easy to overfocus on, one player that didn't pan out and just not pursue a player of a similar prototype. But if you take a look at the top centers in the NFL right now, with the exception of Kansas City's Creed Humphrey, they're all very similar in a lot of ways to Tyler Linderbaum and Garrett Bradbury. They just happen to be better at football, right? That's just how it works. And so having somebody that has those concerns about anchor and stuff like that, like you wouldn't say that Eagles made a mistake drafting Jason Kelsey, right? You wouldn't you wouldn't be that concerned about that. James Daniels, when he's been on the field, has been pretty excellent for the Bears. That is kind of the scenario that you're trying to evaluate. Does this prototype work in the NFL? Not did I fail with this prototype in the past? Otherwise, people would have stopped drafting long corners after Stanley G. Baptiste went in the second, and that obviously didn't happen, right? Like
That's
people kept on drafting. Yeah, he's like the example of the guy that in my head was so overdrafted for his traits because I saw him as a fifth round guy and he went in the second, and I was like, well, we're going a little bit. So he always sticks in my head. But, people didn't stop drafting long corners because one long corner didn't work out. I don't see why they would stop drafting light centers. So it's a concern for sure. I don't think it's any more a concern because of what happened with Bradbury, especially you go down the draft. A lot of these centers are the same. Like they're all fairly athletic and light guys. Cam Jurgens, Dylan Parham, Cole Strange. These are all players. If Cole Strange projects to center, these are all players that are like, below 310 pounds that ran really good short shuttles and 40-yard dashes that, on the field look like they can get to the second level with a fair amount of quickness. And so if you decide no on Tyler Linderbaum for this reason, why would you decide yes on basically a very similar player later on in the draft? Because that's basically your avenue of possibility.
I love that. I love that answer, Arif. But with the Vikings roster, aside from corner and interior offensive line, you don't really look at the roster and think like, man, that position stinks. I mean, there's maybe linebacker picked up Jordan Hicks, maybe, But then when you dig a little deeper with Alexander Madison, who I would be surprised if he's on the roster after this year because he's going to get the bag,
Mm-hmm.
of course. And Irv Smith in a contract year, he could very well likely also leave if he has a good year in a contract year. And Harrison Smith getting up there playing the season at 33 years old. Do you think as the draft goes on, and of course this is going to be dependent on how the board plays out, for a lot of the fifth to seventh round selections, and you can even toss pick 77 in there in the third. And by the way, for anyone that may not know, the Vikings have a gap between 77 and 156 because of the Chris Herndon trade last year, which was a fourth round pick. So that's the reason for the gap between 77 and 156. But do you think they're going to go just BPA the whole way, or what's your thoughts here?
I think there's probably going to be an element of that. I think that if there's going to be a player stuck on a different tier than the other players that they have on their draft board, that they'll be comfortable taking that player without having to worry about position. There's always, exceptions to that. They're not going to, overdraft a fullback or a quarterback or anything like that, but certainly, if a linebacker shows up in the fifth round and they have him graded as a third round guy, they don't have any other third round guys left on the board, they'll probably just take him. Right. So I think that there's going to be some element of that. But I think that they still will try to be strategic about positional value and positional need. I think that they know, for example, because quarterback, you take a look at the roster without knowing the contracts and you think, well, they kind of really only need to take care of slot corner. Maybe they could get an upgrade at Cam Dantzler. But we both know that, Shannon Self and Patrick Peterson are there for 1 year and Cam Dantzler is not a guarantee. And so, of course, cornerback is a need. And that could be kind of true for a lot of areas across the roster, right? Because we don't have, a lot of clarity on the long-term value of Adam Thielen or Harrison Smith, right? So you could, in theory, argue that wide receiver and safety are both needs. And certainly I think I've seen a number of mock drafts that address both of those positions with that in mind. Maybe not in the first round, but, the third round or the fifth round or something along those lines. And you could do that at linebacker. You could do that at I guess, defensive end, which is, the defensive, one of the defensive tackle positions, essentially, for the Vikings in this new position, in this new scheme. You could argue that they don't really have a third defensive lineman for when they're in 3-4. And that could mean that they could grab a guy. So certainly there's a lot of possibilities, but I still think that they would want to prioritize those areas where they're not sure about the long-term future based on contract situation. So that could be edge defender, that could be, ignoring the needs that you identified. It could be edge defender, it could be linebacker, it could be maybe defensive tackle, but certainly that on the defensive side. On the offensive side, I think tight end is still going to be something that they want to pursue because they don't really have a backup. I mean, their backup tight end was a punter in college, right? So like
Zach Davidson, baby.
Yeah.
But so I got to be honest. During the draft process, when Kayvon Thibodeaux, there was like a little bit of an area where like, man, like KT's gonna slide. All he cares about is NFTs, and he should only stick to football, and the whole spiel,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I enjoyed whenever he was falling and whenever he was like getting mocked to us, but it's looking more and more like he's gonna be a Jet now, and it's kind of revolted back to originally, which was he was probably gonna be a top 5 pick. But do you think, having said what you said about the edge position and everything, do you think there's a chance, and the prerequisite would be, I'm thinking someone like Jermaine Johnson has to fall to us at 12, and Stingley and Sauce are both gone. Do you think there's a chance that we go edge at 12?
Yeah, I think that there's a chance. Zarius Smith he's technically under contract for 3 more years, but it's functionally 2.
Right.
And that's one of those positions that is somewhat similar to wide receiver, and that you can just decide to put more on the field. Like you figure like, hey, we got 2 edge defenders. Let's kick Za'Darius Smith inside, and now we've got a third edge defender. We're fine. We really like having this package out there. And Smith has played very well on the inside. Or if you draft the right edge defender like a Jermaine Johnson, who's got that capability, you could get that guy inside, right? And so you can kind of choose to alter kind of the amount of players that you could use or need at a particular position if that position has that kind of flexibility, like wide receiver or edge defender. So I could see that with Jermaine Johnson. He's the guy that I think he's like nobody's top defensive end, but he's a lot of people's favorite defensive end.
Right.
He plays with a lot of really solid fundamentals. He might be the best run defending defensive end in the draft. The thing is just, I've become really attached to these really high ceiling edge defenders. Maybe it's because I've been following the Vikings and they just get these super athletes all the time. And I think that Jermaine Johnson is mostly just good and he's going to stay good,
Right.
which is never a bad thing, obviously. But I love the idea of somebody who could be great, and I kind of want to follow that along. And so there would just be just a little bit of me that would just be like, no, all right, well, they solved that problem, but to what end?
So you said you fall in love with the players that could be great. This obviously wouldn't be a pick 12, by the way. This would be more in the 45 range. But what's your thoughts? Do you think, and this is again with the edge? This is a player that I'm extremely high on. Nick Benito. That is my guy. Like I love him. And where do you stand on Nick Benito?
I find him kind of interesting because he is a bit smaller,
For
right?
sure. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and so that's always kind of like an interesting conversation because edge defenders have been getting smaller, right? When I was looking at the history of Zimmer type defensive ends, when he first came to Minnesota, I was like, wow, he's never drafted a guy below 265 pounds. Period. It just doesn't happen. It was like 270 pounds, 280 pounds. He drafted a 290-pound edge defender, right? And now we see a guy 280 pounds. We're like, yeah, he's got the size to play defensive tackle. Like that's good.
Yeah.
So it is a very different conversation. And then we've seen the success that people like Randy Gregory have had. Now Benito's not as small as Gregory coming out, but it is the weight is enough that I've heard people talk about him potentially being a linebacker instead of an edge defender. And that's exactly what happened with Anthony Barr, 255. They
Right.
moved him from edge defender to linebacker. And I don't know that he's got that kind of backwards movement skill. That's something that you'd be able to see at a pro day or a drill or something like that. Not something you'd be able to see on the field as much. But I do like watching him play a lot. I do like kind of the bend and the explosiveness that he's been able to leverage. This is a good defensive end class, but there's not a ton of players with bend. And so having a guy that's got the ability to kind of slip under, tackles that are setting or oversetting a little bit, that is just, it's kind of a unique ability in this year's class that is kind of fun. I think for players that could be great, we're talking about, the 40s or something like that. I think a guy I like a little bit more than Benito is actually Ebiketie,
Oh, Penn State.
the Penn State guy. Yeah. Which that guy's maxed out. Like you can't add
Oh
weight
yeah.
to his frame. He's like 6'2", he's 247. But man, is he an athlete. Like that's what like Benito is a good athlete, but like Ebiketie is potentially like a great athlete. And so along those lines, or maybe Amari Barno later, that would be that that's in my wheelhouse. Like I said, that'd be fun.
I love like the height, weight, speed guys. Like late, just take a flyer. Like I don't know how far he's gonna fall, but D'Angelo Malone from Western Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
That's love those type of players. But this goes back to like there's no little draft. Like no one's like, oh, this draft. Even if it is there's not as much Trevor Lawrence, Michael Parsons. Are you more excited though as a writer, for the Minnesota Vikings, new regime for the first time in 15 years or, 10 plus years with Rick Spielman having called the shots for all this time? Are you more excited, with the anticipation and the buzz and because there's so many routes that we can go at 12 and then of course for the rest of the draft for that matter as well.
Yeah, a little bit. There's a little bit of hesitation on my part because I know how to write about a Spielman draft. I know
Oh yeah.
what I need to do. I know I need to prepare for. I know I need to keep my head on a swivel. They could just draft another guy while I'm writing up the first guy, right? Like, they set a record, right? In the 7 round draft, they're drafting 15 guys, and I don't think any Vikings writer was surprised that they did that. They were just like, yeah, okay, yeah, fine, 15. I got to write all of these guys up. Great. Um, and so, but I knew that I could. I've never thought. I bet there's no other beat on the planet that thought, hey, I got to pace myself. Watching the draft, right? It's not the same. But I knew instinctively to pace myself, and I knew when they picked a guy before Spielman said a word, before that guy got on the conference call to talk to the reporters, I knew maybe 75-80% of the reason that Spielman would be interested in that guy because I've been covering him for so long
For sure.
that I just know what he tends to like in players. I've been covering Zimmer long enough to know what he tends to like in players. And so if they draft like Cameron Dancer, I was like, oh, okay. Clearly they had Cameron Dancer in the. And I
Pegged.
just knew
Oh
before
yeah.
I said they had Cameron Dancer as a second round guy. He ran, so they dropped him. He ran at his pro day, the virtual
The
pro day that he had,
the
and
438, yeah.
yeah, the
The
438
464, right.
that his agent was there for, and nobody else.
His
um,
agent timed him. His agent timed
yeah,
him, right?
on the video it's the agent. Like they're not
Right.
hiding it, right? And you don't know what he weighed in at, so you're just like, okay, I guess is this a 160-pound guy running a 4.38? That's useless to me, right? But I knew that they probably had a second round grade of the guy. They probably dropped the grade on that guy based off of the 40 time, and then they probably were comfortable in the third round on that guy based off of that pro day, not giving it too much credence or anything like that. And they loved, how hard he hit in college. They loved that he had a high school pedigree as a track athlete. I know that like Spielman cares a lot about the high school athletic pedigree of a player. Like I know he loves wrestlers, right?
Oh,
Like when
that's a big thing. Oh yeah.
yeah, it was huge, right? So when they drafted, I could say basically any Iowa guy that they've drafted, but the defensive tackle, I'm trying to remember his name.
Jaleel
Um,
Johnson.
yeah, Jaleel Johnson. He was like an all-star wrestler in high school. And as soon as they drafted him, I was like, got it. I'm gonna talk about his wrestling background, right? Yeah, Harrison Phillips actually I think has a wrestling background. Now
Dirty
that I think
Harry,
about it,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And although it wasn't a draftee of Spielman, it was a free agent acquisition. But Riley Reef back to the
yeah, yeah.
days.
Yeah. And I think Pat Elfline, like it's
Oh
just,
yeah.
it's like a thing. Right. And so I knew that I could write about that because I knew that Spin would care about it. And I knew he'd bring it up and he did in the presser. Right. And so like those are like, sometimes you don't even know what you know about a guy until it becomes like relevant knowledge. And so I'll bring to bear. I'll be like, yeah, well, they drafted another young player. The Vikings have drafted the youngest player in the NFL draft like 3 out of the 7 times. It feels like it's a pattern. So I'm going to bring that up here. It's just stuff that you get used to after covering the same guy for a decade. That I'm not going to have access to that. That with that wealth of knowledge that I don't even know the stuff that I'm capable of writing about a guy. When they draft a guy, I can say, well, I know that Kwesi comes from an analytical background, and I
Oh
can
yeah.
take a look at, the athleticism and the college production and see if maybe that is a proximate reason. But Kwesi could just go up there at the podium and say, yeah, we drafted this guy. It has nothing to do with the fact that he ran a 4.240. That's nice, but we knew he was fast. Really, it was just our scouts. Our scouts fell in love with the guy, and really the best analytics are the eye test. And if he said that, I'd just be like, well, that's weird, but I don't know him, so
Right,
fine.
right.
Right? So like that's the thing is like there's going to be something exciting about having this like infinite plane of possibility ahead of me, knowing that hey, I'm unconstrained about the type of player that they'll draft or how they'll approach contracts and stuff like that. I know that Spielman drafts a contract ahead. I know that very often he'll draft a guy at a position that won't be a need until next year,
Like
right?
Mike Hughes just didn't work out.
Yeah, Mike Hughes is
Right.
the perfect example of that. Like if that had worked out, that would have been a really smart move because they had three
Yeah.
cornerbacks leaving free agency. Like,
Right.
oh yeah, smart, 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 smart. Like that. It's like that sort of thing. And so, Anthony Barr is the same way. I think they did end up extending Chad Greenway, but at the time, I don't think they were planning to. Just like the whole time, he would always do that. And now, if Kwesi drafts, a linebacker, I'm gonna wonder like, well, are they gonna put 3 linebackers on the field? Is that it, or are they going to trade a linebacker, or is Jordan Hicks is it going to be like a sub package thing? What's going to
Or
happen to the 7 other linebackers in the roster? I've got no idea. But if Spielman does it, I'm like, oh well, Jordan Hicks is gone in a couple of years. Great, now I know that.
right, or even there's the thing is like there's so many guys that I like between that's gonna go between like that 35 to like 60, like that sweet spot, and it's just like man, like he'd be nice in our team, and it's like guy I was thinking of when you just brought up the linebackers was Leo Chanel from Wisconsin. Just
Mm-hmm.
he's not exactly like he's definitely not Eric Hendricks in the play style, but it's like man, like he'd be nice. Just imagine him on one side of the formation, Kendricks on the other, and then of course you have the edge rushers with Zedarius and Daniil. That'd be chef's kiss right there. But Spielman also like the guys like Adam Thielen, the first one in, last one out, lunch pail. They
Yeah,
every synonym for hard work that you can possibly imagine.
he drafted like 9 team captains, I think, in that 15 player year. Like, yeah, he loves that stuff.
But so there's one question I had about a fullback. You mentioned a fullback earlier. Kevin O'Connell didn't have a fullback for the Rams. What's the deal with our guy CJ Ham? 2019 Pro Bowl CJ Ham, by the way.
2019 Pro Bowl to
Yes,
CJM. Yeah, put some respect on his name for
of
sure.
course.
Yeah, I think that CJ Ham is going to continue to have a role in the team. It's going to be somewhat prominent. I don't think it's going to be as prominent, of course. I don't think anyone expects that. But he comes from a tradition that for most of its history has had a fullback and continues to have a fullback on the field. I mean, Kyle Juszczyk is from the same type of offense, right? And they just happen to put a fullback out there. Now, Ham, I really like him a lot. He's
So do I.
not really a Kyle Juszczyk
Right,
type,
right, right.
but I think that they'll find ways to use him. And the fact that CJ Ham is somewhat effective as an inline blocker, not just as a lead blocker,
Right.
and is somewhat effective as a pass catcher, will allow them to kind of be diverse in the way that they use, the personnel that they have. Right. Knowing that they don't have a backup tight end, knowing that they liked their third receiver in KJ Osborne, but they don't it's not a 3 receiver set really with KJ Osborne as your starting guy. He's just, maybe he develops into that guy, but you can't count on that. It's nice having somebody like CJ Ham out there where you've got a quality player on the field, and you've got, maybe I don't have my backup tight end, maybe I don't have that third receiver. I can put, CJ Ham out there, and I've got 5 skill players that I can trust at once. And I think that is going to be more important for O'Connell than just saying, well, it's really important for my offense to have 3 receivers. So I'm just going to put out, this third receiver. Maybe KJ Osborne gets hurt and they have to put in Amir Smith-Marset and he's not ready yet or something like that. And O'Connell, in some universe would just be too dogged and too stubborn and just say, well, we're a 3 receiver offense. We got 3 out there. Not really. I think that having Ham out there allows them to be a little bit more flexible about the way that they approach that offense.
For sure. And I mean, I know Kirk said multiple times. I mean, those watching the games, there's times where CJ is truly the unsung hero, and the iconic Justin Jefferson touchdown against the Titans where he did the gritty, like the last 10 yards. From what I remember, I don't think that happens without CJ throwing a nice block.
Sick block.
Yeah, right.
Sick block. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was one this past year, and CJ was mic'd up against somebody, and he's all energy, all ass and elbows. But I don't want to take too much of your time. Just so rapid fire to end. You ready?
Sure. Why not?
All right. You're out there, TCO Performance Center in Eagan in July. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
You have a better shot guarding Justin Jefferson 1-on-1, no safety help, or blocking Daniil Hunter 1-on-1. You're in front of Kirk. You're the guy.
Jesus Christ! Oh my God.
You want to know my thought process first?
Yeah. Let's hear what you got.
So I was thinking, with Justin, my only real shot is if he trips and falls.
Mm-hmm.
But with Daniil, I'm thinking I get inside. He has 35-inch arms. I'm probably around the 30 area. I'm only 5'10", but I'm hoping that I just get inside, just grab right under here, and just hold on for dear life, and hope a ref wouldn't call a holding. And he's running around the field with 160 extra pounds on him. That's my thought process. But
all right, so it really depends on my ultimate goal here. If my goal is to succeed, that's a little bit different than if my goal is to survive, right?
Yeah.
Like right. If I want to survive, yeah, I'm 100% playing cornerback. Like I don't need those ACLs to live, right? But I might need my chest in one piece, right? That's the calculus there. But if I don't have to worry about the potential for injury, that does change things. I would say that a receiver against a bad cornerback gets open most of the time.
Oh yeah.
An edge rusher against a bad tackle still doesn't get a pressure most of the time. So there is that. I don't know that difference is very meaningful when it's a 5'4" sports writer, but there is that, right? I would also I've seen tackles who have slightly slow punches, their ability to get their hands out. They never get their hands on it. So I don't know that your plan is there.
Yeah.
For me, I'm thinking about cut blocks. That's what I'm thinking about, right? I'm hoping Cousins has an option in the first second of the play, because I might give him a second. That's my goal, right? And so I might be more successful throwing my entire body at this guy's knees than I am holding up for half a second against a receiver. So that's my thought process. But if I want to survive, 100% I'm going up against Justin Jefferson.
Maybe even if you get lucky, just grip onto Daniil's leg and so he has to one leg it the whole way around. Right. But
wait, that's 10 yards, right? Yeah. If I'm committing a penalty against Jefferson, that's 40, 50, 60 yards.
Exactly. Spot foul. So
yeah,
the more you know. All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. two longtime Vikings. I'm not going to include the Lions and the Cowboys stint. Everson Griffin, Anthony Barr, do
Mhm.
either return next year?
I don't think so. I think that they did make an attempt to get Anthony Barr to return, and they probably just couldn't find a way to agree on those terms.
Right.
So that was probably the closest. And maybe kind of long term in a couple of years we might see Anthony Barr return. I still kind of doubt it. Everson, I think that's kind of it. I think that his
Right.
ship has sailed.
Yeah, he's
You know,
34.
yeah, he's 34. His last couple of attempts at an NFL return have all been cut short or disappointing in some way. And so you just really hope that he's earned enough over his career that he can get his life in order. That's like
For sure.
the priority for him. Versus Anthony Barr, you know, I don't have that worry for him, at least right now as I know him.
Still got a couple years. Yeah.
And he's almost certainly going to find another team. But I just don't think that I think that he's going to continue to command higher salaries than NFL fans think he deserves, just because his
Right.
skill set is so unique, and so it'd be tough to get him back on the Vikings.
For sure. And follow up with Ev, I think he had like 5 or 6 sacks combined with both the Lions and Cowboys. So do you think he's a Ring of Honor player?
I think so.
Yeah, I do too. It's close.
I think that's a fair question because it is pretty close.
Right.
But he was a stellar player for like a good 4 or 5 seasons. And before that was a really, really valuable rotational backup
Oh, he
guy.
was so fun.
Yeah, fantastic. And so yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that he kind of deserves that consideration.
Like 2012, like long-haired Brian Robinson, Jared Allen coming off the
Hmm.
22 sack. It was fun times. And then
Hmm.
RG3 kind of like, did the whole thing. But anyway, I was at that game. That was not fun. But KJ Osborne, lightning in a bottle because he had 700 yards last year, 7 touchdowns, or legit
700.
wide receiver 3.
Um, for players like that, you kind of try to figure out if they played consistently throughout the season,
Sure.
played consistently against a variety of coverages, and played that well before the season and the preseason, like if it wasn't a surprise to the Vikings or to beat writers. And I think he checks most of those boxes. I think that he was a little bit better at the beginning of the season last year than he was near the middle of the end of the season. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But for the most part, I think that he has demonstrated that he is certainly better than any wide receiver 4 that most people can hope to have, and probably as good as a number of wide receiver 3s. So I would say that his explosion is legit. I don't know if he'll get 700 yards because I just don't know what this offense is going to look
Right.
like.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But plus, they could always draft a guy. But certainly I think that he is a talented player and he's demonstrated that.
Yeah, no, I'm I'm pretty vocal on Twitter. I just tweet, especially during the games, whatever, like I usually reply to the Vikings last year every game, like fire Mike Zimmer. I was very vocal about that. But KJ, I don't know if there was a player who had a bigger stride from year 1 to year 2, because KJ went from, I was sweating every punt return he was out there for,
Mm-hmm.
to legitimately, he had more yards last year than a lot of big name players. But anyways,
Yeah. That was because he had. I don't know if he had any offensive snaps his rookie year.
right.
Like that's the thing that like really gets you.
Yeah. But Arif, final question. Pick 12. Who is it?
Uh,
We're 48 hours away.
gun to my head, I'm gonna
Yeah.
say Derek Stingley. I think he actually does
Okay.
fall that far.
I
Yeah.
hope. I hope so. I appreciate you having you on. Welcome back anytime. And I'm looking forward to next couple days.
All right. Peace out, man.